Hello and welcome to another great interview on The Liz Wheeler Show. As you know, anybody who wants exclusive early access to these interviews, you can join us on the Liz Wheeler Show community at lizwheelershow.com/locals. VIPs get early access, exclusive early access to these interviews. Joining me today is a good friend of mine, a fellow warrior, president of Students for Life, Kristan Hawkins. Kristan, good to see you.
Good to see you in person.
It is. We haven't seen each other since the March for Life, maybe 2 years ago, I think.
That's right.
All right, so you're launching just an incredible movement. You are at the helm of an incredible movement. And this new campaign, I want to talk to you about this because this is like nothing that we've seen before in the pro-life movement. And I don't just say that because I'm sitting across from you. I say that because reading through what the fight that you are fighting, hearing you articulate it is really moving. It's really something. And I don't want to sit here and describe it. I want to read so that our audience, our listeners, our viewers can understand the fight that you're fighting. So it's called The Final Fight for Freedom. And you write, Americans today are faced with a historic challenge and a world-changing opportunity. The fight against abortion is the fight to make good on our nation's promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for every citizen without exception. This is the final fight for freedom. In 1776, America's founders pledged their fortunes, their honor, and their lives to fight for liberty. They rebelled against a mighty empire and won a monumental victory, ushering in a new age of just government for themselves and their descendants. That was the first fight for freedom. By providence, grit, and sheer genius, the founders wrote a constitution that made this nation into the wonder of the world. The promise of that constitution is just this, that every one of us is created equal, and that the American government exists to protect those rights that are ours as God's gift. The first of those rights is life. It was not an accident that the founders mentioned life before anything else. Without life, none of our other rights are safe. You cannot be free or hold property or speak truth if your life can be threatened by arbitrary power. As James Madison wrote, every citizen has a property very dear to him in the safety and liberty of his person. The promise of America means that the state protects that property, that liberty, and above all, that life for every person. Now, when I read this for the first time, I got the goosebumps, and I thought, this is, you call this the final fight for freedom. This is a revolutionary mindset.
Yeah, I think it's an important conversation to be having right now. For example, we have a lot going on in our mainstream press about abortion, and there's a lot of talk about it. And we have a Dobbs decision, a Supreme Court decision expected in June. And there's a lot of talk about it. And I think we kind of lose sight when we're talking about abortion as a political sense or just talking about it as 2022 and 2024. But we really need to get at the heart of the matter, which is this is a fight for the lives of millions of preborn little baby girls and baby boys. This is a fight for their freedom, their very right to exist. And that is why we in the pro-life movement fight so hard. We've been blessed to live in this nation that fought that first fight, that war of independence, right, for us to govern ourselves, right, to create this America, this an exceptional nation, this what is the best country on earth. And then we had this second large fight to ensure that all men and all women were equal and were citizens under the law, right? As Abraham Lincoln said, right, that we have to give work freedom to the slave in order to ensure freedom for the free. And so now when we look at abortion, we think about what happened in 1973 when 7 men in the Supreme Court simply took away the right to life for millions of preborn children. It fundamentally disordered the rights that we have in our country because it put pursuit of happiness over others' right to life. And that's backwards. It's wrong. And every time in our history that the Supreme Court and our nation has got it wrong, we've had to go back and reverse ourselves. It's life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that is why we're calling this the final fight for freedom.
Well, and this is a really interesting philosophical argument. And I know, in our public schools, philosophy is not taught. Students don't engage in this kind of well, intellectual, academic pursuit,
right.
really. But I mean, you're talking about something that our nation has experienced time and time again. The left likes to castigate our country as being fundamentally racist or evil because of the mistakes we've made. But I think what makes our country different than other countries in the sense that we're all fallen, we're all going to be sinners, we're all going to have laws and actions that are in violation of someone else's rights. There's never going to be anything perfect. You know, what did the founders say? If men were angels, we wouldn't need a government.
That's right.
But the unique thing about the founding of our country is that even in the founding documents, it enshrined all of the words, the phraseology, the spirit of the law that allowed our country to overcome the bad things that men implemented when they misapplied the founding principles to law here. And in a sense, this is almost the third founding of our country then, to say, listen, these rights that are enshrined in our Constitution and our founding documents have been misapplied since Roe v. Wade.
That's absolutely right. And you can see what happens when you have this disordering of rights and the discussions and the dehumanization that goes on because we've disordered those rights. And you can look into the assisted suicide or euthanasia battles, or even look at some of the conversations that I've been seeing on social media where folks who are pro-vaccination celebrating the death of those who contract COVID who haven't been vaxxed, and literally celebrating that other Americans have passed away from this illness simply because they chose not to get a vaccination. But we've dehumanized these other human beings. And that's all because we devalued the preborn child. And we started to say, and we allowed the Supreme Court to tell us what human beings have value and what human beings don't. And we allowed us to say, well, I think you have value because I value you, but somebody down the street may not value you. I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's the same pattern, actually. The same pattern that's happened for over 200 years in our country. I mean, think about the founding. Why did the American colonists rebel against the tyrant King George? Because he was treating them as less. He was treating them as inferior. He was deciding that he was the arbiter of privilege versus the protector of rights, and so they rebelled. They said, no, we're going to self-govern ourselves. Fast forward to the Civil War era, and the American government was treating Black Americans, I mean, obviously enslaved. They were dehumanizing them, treating them as less, depriving them of fundamental, inherent, God-given, constitutionally protected rights. And it wasn't until we corrected that. This again, I mean, the dehumanization thread throughout our country, both the errors and then the correction, that's really chilling.
It's absolutely chilling. And, I was thinking about Plessy and Dred Scott and all these horrific Supreme Court decisions that were handed down the Supreme Court. And, the left likes to say all the time that, Roe versus Wade is decided. Abortion is decided. You can't go back. But that's what you just said earlier is our founding fathers gave us the tools in our Constitution and our founding documents to be able to go back and to correct when we've made egregious errors, which is exactly what has happened since 1973 with abortion. And science proves that this was an egregious decision that was made.
Yes, and just to make sure that everyone knows, I mean, Plessy versus Ferguson and Brown versus Board of Education, I mean, these were very significant rulings. These were rulings from the Supreme Court, or at least Plessy was ruling from a Supreme Court that said that African Americans were lesser, that they weren't citizens, that segregation was fine. And these rulings from the Supreme Court were precedent. They were what's now known as settled law for decades before they were overturned, before Brown versus Board of Education overturned that ruling, and the 14th Amendment overturned, the bad rulings here. And this is our responsibility. I mean, it's not just a right versus a left issue. If we want a nation that is prosperous, not just financially and economically prosperous, if we want a nation that is prosperous, meaning that we are the last best hope of humanity, that we are that light on the hill, then we have to make sure that we are living up to those founding ideals and making sure that we're treating everyone equally, because if we're not, then in a sense, we're not the America that was founded in 1776.
And I think it's important to note too, is if we can take a whole group of human beings and say that they have no value, simply because somebody else may not see them as having value, or they may be inconvenient to another human being, then that can happen to you.
Yeah, because what's the limiting principle? I mean, the people
There
on the other
isn't any.
side of this issue will say,
There
well, that's a
isn't.
slippery slope fallacy. But I mean, I always use a pithy response to that and say, well, a slippery slope, if you sit on the top of a snowy hill in a sled, you might just slide down. And that's where we are right now. So going back to the philosophical aspect of this. So if this is the final fight for freedom, that's really something too, because it's taken us over 200 years to correct some of the wrongs, or I would call it they of course are wrong, but the misapplication of our founding documents. And in order to address this, in order to fight this fight, we have to understand what we're fighting for, and we have to empower young people, the next generation, whether that's, I mean, it's not even millennials anymore, really, it's Generation Z. We have to, Gen Z. We have to empower these youth to fight this fight, to understand that it's not just political bickering, but this is how to save our nation, and that's what you guys do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very important for young people to understand that we have life and liberty and pursuit of happiness, and we have to get those rights in order. Because as soon as we start saying that someone's pursuit of happiness trumps another person's right to life, it's going to always end up wrong. It's always going to be fundamentally disordered. There's always going to be pain. There's always going to be death. And that they have to see that this is part of a larger battle that they're fighting, and that they've been called to be a part of, and that they're joining and they're laboring for. Because it's not easy, as you know, to be a conservative and to be a young conservative, especially on a place that is very hostile to young conservatives. I think, but it helps for them to see, I'm part of a group of freedom fighters that has been fighting for freedom since the founding of America. And this is just a natural continuation of that fight.
Yeah, they're not just the biological descendants of the founders, they're the ideological descendants of the founders as well. Yeah, it's an incredible thing too. And I think Gen Z is unique in that they struggle with finding meaning in their lives, right? Because they're so prosperous. They're looking for fulfillment, they're looking for meaning. But I think they're very fortunate because there are these forces of ideological evil that we're facing in our country, whether it's Marxism, whether it's critical race theory, whether it's attacks on the family, on marriage, the transgender issue, all of these daunting and evil ideologies that we're facing, they have the opportunity, they are called, it's their vocation to fight back against that. And nothing will provide more fulfillment than fighting for the rights of people whose voices have been stifled. I want to talk for a second about your handbook, because this is an incredible document. It's truly an incredible document. I encourage everybody to go to studentsforlife.org/fight and read it for yourself. Take time to read this, because this is not just PowerPoint slides on a deck. This is an incredible piece of philosophy, if you will. And one of the things that I think will not just appeal in the marketing sense, but one of the things that I think will touch people's hearts is this idea. We've spent the last year watching parents challenge school board members who want to teach their white children that they are oppressors based on the color of their skin, or their black children that they're oppressed based on the color of their skin, just this abject racism. And parents have stood up and said, stop. This is not who we are as people. This is not who we are. It doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. This is not who we are as Americans, as human beings. And Students for Life does this in this final fight for freedom as well. They challenge school board members over the integration of abortion into education. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely on the front lines when it comes to stopping Planned Parenthood's infiltration of our schools. I mean, you have to think about the abortion industry today and who their target demographic is. It is our young people, and it's not just college kids, it's high school, middle school, and yes, grade school children, because they seek to build a relationship with young people as early as they possibly can, because their goal is to create repeat customers to their abortion business. Maybe it's not an abortion every time. It's birth control, STD testing, not treatment, because they only treat like 17% of STDs they diagnose, by the way, a little unknown fact. But they have a cycle, and they're preying on our young people. So for example, Students for Life just last month released our Christian Schools Project, where we actually researched Planned Parenthood's relationship with our Christian universities in America. There's about 700 Christian schools in the country, and we found over 100 of them who had public relationships with Planned Parenthood. Thankfully, after going to them in private, doing the Christian thing, going to them in private, asking them to correct their ways, we were able to see a large majority, disassociate themselves, but still today we have about 60 Christian schools that have refused to disassociate themselves from Planned Parenthood. It's unbelievable. And so, this is something we have to be on our guard about as parents, as grandparents, as Americans, to see how the abortion industry is really targeting our young people, whether it's at the school board, and we're talking about sex education and it's crazy. We allow Planned Parenthood, the group that profits off of bad decision making, to come into our schools and tell young kids to make good decisions.
It's terrifying, isn't it?
It's like giving the tobacco lobby money to come in and do anti-tobacco programs.
I know, and both of us are mothers of young children, and it's absolutely terrifying to think about. So I do think it's very important to understand what the fight is before you even think about how to fight that fight, because you have to have grit, you have to have perseverance, you have to have principles and be solid in those principles in order to then translate that into the courage to fight the fight. And so that's where I want to transition. We understand now, you're presenting this fight in the correct context, in my opinion. You're presenting this properly as the final fight for freedom. It is the ideological descendant of the fight, the Revolutionary War, that then begot the Civil War. And now it's this war for the lives of these unborn children. I think it's 60 million, 65 million unborn children that have been aborted.
It's 2,363 a day today and tomorrow and the next day.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it'll bring a tear to your eye to think about that. So this talks about the philosophy. It talks about the ideology. It talks about this vocation or this calling to fight, how everyone is called. It's not always a pleasant fight. There's a call for parents on the school boards to push back on Planned Parenthood. There's a call for students on campuses. Talk about the legal aspect of this, because this is something that we cannot count on every single elected member, even in the Republican Party, to fight this fight with the grit that it needs to have in order to succeed. Talk to me about the legal and legislative fights that are ahead.
Well, part of this battle plan that we put together, we really wanted to give it a kind of a sneak peek as to what we're doing in the pro-life movement, what Students for Life is working and building towards as we get ready for hopefully very soon a reversal of Roe versus Wade, a changing of the game, the decision of abortion coming back to the states. And we have a blueprint in this battle plan. You can go studentsforlife.org/fight, download it. You can read it all. I don't want to go into all the details, but we do have a blueprint in there as to what we need to fight for and what we can be doing, all of us, regardless of our age, of our skill set, of our experience, our comfortability. There is a place for each of us in this fight right now. And one of those places, and many of your viewers will probably find themselves in that place, is in the political, is in electing leaders who, as you mentioned, who have grit, who will be willing to stand up and to take the hard votes and to fight back against the abortion lobby and their thousands, tens of thousands of campaign dollars. It's also about passing laws that actually will do something, not laws that, are just for mere show. So in states like, all across the country, particularly even in Republican states, and this is where I've been very, very focused on recently, is a lot of times we think of, we've got to pass laws in California and New York and Illinois, the states where have the highest abortion rates, who allow abortions up until the moment of birth. But it's actually going to be in the conservative states. When Roe is reversed, the fight is going to be in the conservative states. They're going to flood. If you're in Mississippi, you've been in Jackson, Mississippi, your state house has largely been left alone by Planned Parenthood and the abortion lobby. Day one, they're coming to Mississippi to make abortion legal in your state. And so you're going to be called as a conservative to speak out, to talk to your elected officials, the delegates, the state senators, calling the governor's office, making sure you're electing the right folks who are actually going to speak up and are actually going to have the tenacity to do the hard thing, to pass the laws that will actually make abortion illegal and unthinkable in your state.
Right, because you say this, I say this. This is not a unique strain of thought to say the fight over abortion doesn't end if Roe v. Wade is overturned. That is when the fight just begins. And I get emails and messages and comments from people on a daily basis saying, listen, I cast my vote every 4 years, for Congress every 2 years, but in between that, what can I do? What can I do? I don't just want to sit here and turn on the news every night and watch our country fall apart. What actions can I take? Well, this battle plan, there's a seat with every person's name on it. As you said, it doesn't matter your skill set, your age, your location, none of that. You are called. There is a seat with your name on it. So go to studentsforlife.org/fight, download this, take a look, join the fight. Kristan, I'm really proud of what your organization does. It's a pleasure to sit down and talk to you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone on Locals, as you know, you get exclusive early access to this interview if you join us at lizwheelershow.com/locals. That's lizwheelershow.com/locals. Thank you for watching. If you haven't already, give this video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button below, and ring the bell to make sure you never miss a video.